something extremely interesting to talk about, which is, of course, the GM ignition recalls. Now, most like all horrible things start, we're starting off with the Saturn Ion. As you know, a lot of people like to think of me, well, all 571 people, think of me as like the patron saint of regular, everyday, ugly cars. And yet I do not like the Chevrolet Ion. I'm sorry, I have to admit it, but I don't vibe with it, right? So, while the Chevrolet Ion was in production, they were testing it, right? This was like 2001, right? They were testing it, they were just seeing how things are going, right? It was made from 2003 to 2007, so it's likely that they already, was existing it and planning it at least 5 years ahead. So it's 2001, and the car is in the car testing facility, right? Before you put a car out, you need to make sure that everything works. Designing a car is a lot of work, so it's sitting there, right? There's there's technicians all around it, checking it out, making sure that everything about this car is good, right? They don't want to put anything out that might be concerning. So, the technician is sitting in the driver's seat. He's sitting there and he's checking out the interior, and all of a sudden, I believe, this isn't exact. Remember, this is slightly not hyperbole. This is slightly me filling in gaps, right? Or what I assume happened, right? So, this bit didn't happen verbatim, but it has something like this, right? So he's sitting in the seat, he bumped the gauge cluster, and all of a sudden, the ignition switch, which was on, bumped to off really quickly, just, like that, and turned the car off. Now, that is an issue, right? The issue is just the ignition switch, right? It just switched to off when he bumped it with his knees, right? Oh, well, not that big of a deal. Well, believe it or not, that is kind of a big deal. Now, what was the gigantic big, issue here? Like, what happened? Well, it turns out that the part in the vehicle's ignition switch, the springy bit, like my car, they're all push-button starts, but they're still springy, and, when you push it, it's nice and springy. This one wasn't so springy, so it was really delicate, right? It could just easily be, bumped and lumped into whatever piece you want to be. And this often led to the engine being prematurely turned off by just, everyday things. So, why, would this be an issue, having your car be turned off, randomly? Well, why does your car, turn off things when you turn off the ignition switch? Well, as you know, if you ever kept lights on or your radio on, when you turn that thing off, you should turn those off to save your poor 12-volt battery. It's kind of like a symbiotic relationship, right? The battery starts the engine charges the battery. Perfectly working in harmony, with the alternator and everything. So this doesn't sound like that big of an issue, right? You hit, something, and your interior lights go off. Well, believe it or not, something that generates a lot of disturbances to the ignition is driving. Driving has a lot of disturbances. Now, the big issue here, believe it or not, wasn't that your engine, right, from bumping and being turned off like that, isn't going to jerkingly shut off and, get shaken out of the engine or break its engine mounts or something like that. In fact, the engine damage was minimal. The issue is, if it turns off all of this stuff, all this garbage, it's also turning off more important things, like airbags. So that's the gist of it right here, right? But how many cars were involved? It cannot be that many, right? Just a little issue in the Saturn Ion, being bumped with your knee, it'll switch the car ignition off, yada, yada, yada. Airbags will go down, and they caught this in 2021. in 2001, 20 years ago. In 2001. And so, right, they had time to fix it, right? But how many cars were involved, right? Because it should be none, realistically. Because GM knew about it, and they had a chance to replace 30 million. 30 million cars. 30 million. That is so much. It's impossible for humans to, think of that much money. 30 million. We hear the billions all the time, CEOs' salaries or whatever. But 30 million is still a lot compared to the billions. That's a lot of cars to be recalled. So exactly, if this was on the Saturn Ion, bumped it, and then it hit the ignition switch, how would this affect 30 million cars? Did they just let the Ion go? And I don't think that many Ions were sold, because I know, living down in here in Florida, I've seen 2, and both of them were probably the same car just driving around. It's because of parts bins. Car companies, like I said, it's very hard to manufacture a car, so it goes through all kinds of tests and stuff. But, like, when you're doing things, don't you want to save yourself some time? So maybe, like, let's say you're in college and you're writing a paper and it needs to be in, I don't know, MLA format, right? And you copy an older paper, delete the stuff, and keep the, format at the top, right? Because that's just easier, right? That's kind of what car companies do. They swap parts from car to car. In fact, one of my favorite auto manufacturers, Toyota, does this very frequently. My 2010 Prius shares the same ignition switch as my 2008 Prius. My mom's RAV4 has very similar interior bits. In fact, the buttons are the same. Toyota and, especially GM, these cheaper car manufacturers, oftentimes, pitch parts between different cars, right? And that's usually fine. It saves on cost, makes the car cheaper, whatever. But when it comes to ignition switches that are bad and faulty, discovering that, you've been using it for quite a while is concerningly an issue, right? And that's why we get this 30 million number. It was not just in Ions. It was in Chevy Cobalt, HHRs, almost every single small Chevy vehicle. Remember, they all use the same ignition because from a Chevy point of view, why not, right? Now, I love any chance I can get at bashing GM for doing something stupid. This is not one of those times. Every car company does this. It is completely normal, if not that great, right? So let's look at this recall. When did the recall happen? If they found, when 2014. 2014. The recall happened in 2014. That is 13 years later. 13 years. That is a lot of time. 13 years. That's half of my life. 13 years. That is a lot of time. A very substantial amount of time. 13. I don't think people grasp this. 13 years. Ridiculous. That 13 years. So what's going to make you even angrier is the timeline. 2001, GM detects the defect during pre-production testing of the Saturn Ion. See, got that right. A service technician closes inquiry to the stalling Ion after changing the keyring and notices that problem was fixed. GM recognizes the defects again as the Chevrolet Cobalt replaces the Cavalier. Bro Stu wasn't the only one to have a Cavalier. In fact, the Cavalier was widely renowned for being a very good car, and it was replaced with this lovely beast, right? GM thought, hey, we're going to use the same ignition, we don't even care, right? So they did, in fact, have a choice, as the Cobalt came out in 2004. 2004, they had plenty of time to switch it out, right? In 2005, GM rejected a proposal to fix the problem because it would be too costly and take too long. This is 2005. This is only 4 years after it happened. By the way, this is NPR. Thanks a lot. Anyway, 2005, easy. May 2005, a GM engineer advises the company to redesign the keyhead, but the proposal is ultimately rejected. And it just keeps going and going and going and going and going and going and going. It's essentially just GM's average, garbage of rejecting things, refusing to do recalls, all of that, for 13 years, just over and over and over and over and over again. So what ended up? Mary Barra, there she is. Oh, she's looking sad. Mary, you haven't even ruined the company on EVs yet. What are you looking so sad for? So become CEO, first woman to run a major automaker. And she finally, did the thing. So, there are bad things about Mary Barra, and then there are good things. Finally, under her leadership, it was finally recalled. But that's still ridiculous. And there were still 30 million vehicles and 124 what? 124 what? 124 is still a large number. $124 is a medium amount of money, right? That's a good, decent amount. $124. Though 124 is a number in general. Those are the number of deaths because of this. People getting into accidents, the ignition switches off, they have no, and remember, right, a lot of people are thinking, like, it can't be that bad, right? Like, you're driving, you bump it, all the ignition switches go off. What's the chance that you're going to get into an accident if that happens, right? So let's talk about the chances here, right? So you're driving your car, you bump it, your ignition switches off, and then someone just T-bones you, right? Like, what's the chance of that happening? Well, it gets a lot more, realistic in realizing how so many of these deaths happen when you realize that if I was driving my car, the lights turned off and everything turned, and my car turned off while driving, I would be, to say the least, a little freaked out. And I don't think I would be focusing on driving all that much now that, well, I'm not driving anymore. Like, yes, you could still control and brake and steer the vehicle, but no airbags, right? So that's the day I'm doing that. I'm going to be a little bit shaken up. I'm going to be a little bit on my nerves. I'm not going to be as good of a driver as I would be usually. That's how all of these accidents happen. So let's look at the full vehicle list. Saturn Ion, Cobalt, HHR, G5, Solstice, and Saturn Sky. Wow, what a list. Isn't that just such a great little fantastic list of GM being GM and refusing to do great things. Just great. Just so perfect. Anyway, with that, thank you for watching. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. And I've got to say, I love the intro too. I love it too. I love making it. I love these videos. And this is going to be maybe a 3 to 5 part series. I don't know yet.